so let's kick off. Welcome to what is sure to be one of a couple different hardening your N-central servers webinars, only because when I built this, I did it through a couple blogs that I wrote. If you go to Google and you type in hardening your N-central server, you will see two particular blogs that I wrote around how to secure your N-central server. So I thought I would take all of that information, because some of it is old, and do a webinar around it and do this bootcamp. So let's begin. This content may contain forward-looking statements regarding future product plans and development efforts, so on and so forth. What this basically means, if I start talking about something like a roadmap item, something that's coming or potentially coming, just know that product plans and development efforts do change. It does happen. So you cannot take that as a promise to deliver. Now, a little general housekeeping. Everyone is on mute. This session is being recorded. Please ask questions. This bootcamp is for you. If you've ever wondered how to harden your N-central server or how to secure it, this is the perfect opportunity to ask those kinds of questions. Let me know if I have any audio or video issues. I typically don't have any video issues, but from time to time, my wireless headset will cut out or what have you, or I move my head around sometimes and you can't hear me. And again, this session is being recorded and will be posted to enable you in the coming weeks ahead. All right, who am I? Okay, so if you've never been on one of my boot camps, my name is Jason Murphy. I'm one of 7 head nerds here at Enable. I have worked at very large MSPs. I have worked at very small MSPs. All told, I have been using N-central for over a decade. And doing so is why I built this bootcamp, because while Enable documentation is good, we're going to talk about some of the best practices around what you should probably look at doing around hardening your N-central server. And again, if you want to hit me up on LinkedIn or Reddit, please do so. You've got my email, letter J, MURPHY @n-able.com. Okay, now what I will tell you is, please have your phone ready, because I have inserted a few QR codes and URLs into this webinar, only because there is some supplying documentation that you're going to need as well. A couple commercials. Want to win 25 bucks? Okay, so all you need to do is grab that. Let me just go on Do Not Disturb. I do this all the time. My apologies. And D&D. There we go. My apologies. But grab your phone, open up your camera, click the link to what will take you to what is a website called G2, where you can leave an N-central review and win a $25 gift card. Okay, so click that. And one thing I will tell you is, sometimes our partners are apprehensive about subscribing to things at Enable, because there's a lot of marketing material or what have you that comes. Just know that that will not happen if you do subscribe to a Head Nerd blog. Myself, these other 7 head nerds produce a lot of blog content around things like patch management, automation, sales and marketing even. So just know that you can subscribe and get your hands on some awesome nerd content. Just know that every time that you attend a bootcamp or office hours, which by the way is at 10 a.m. today, Eastern Standard, or let's say in a couple hours, I think it's at 10, or if you're part of our partner advisory group or council, if you are part of being an advocate, if you've given us a testimonial, you accumulate these points. And when we do an Empower event, and by the way, our next Empower event is in May of next year in Berlin. If you do come, what we're going to be able to do is give you an award. Okay. Now, we're going to talk about a couple things that are important to understand when we start talking about hardening your N-central server or securing your N-central server. I'll use hardening and securing interchangeably. Is that Enable is going through a modernization exercise, okay? And that is really what we've termed, in terms of this vision, around Ecoverse. right? And that has to do with N-central. The reason being is N-central's been around for over 24 years. It is a monolith, what we call in development terms a monolith. It's an encapsulated operating system with a database and a whole bunch of underlying components that we've thrown together over that plus 20-year period, and provided you, our MSP partners, a way for you to manage your customers. Well, obviously, in terms of modernization, things are moving to the cloud, right? So will N-central. So what I do want to point out to you today is when you look at Enable, there are three main pillars of what we do. One is called Unified Management, better known as RMM, okay? And that's where we do patch and automation, etc., right? We have the cybersecurity tool sets, like for Enable MDR through Adlumin, or EDR through SentinelOne. We have mail protection, identity protection, and vulnerability management is coming this year. And also Cove data protection. So we have these three main pillars that we really focus on around at Enable. Now, what we're also going to be doing is, based on all of those things that we do, is provide you some vehicle to be able to get intelligence and insights. That is really our first foray around things like analytics, right? Now, of course, when you have this interoperability around technology, you want things like automation. You want to be able to do things across many different types of systems, right? That is where things like APIs and integrations really become paramount, not just with Enable. This is not going to be some kind of Enable closed system. You're going to be able to hook in other technologies as well, right? And if you've ever gone to enable.com and looked at our technology alliance program, our technology alliance partners, it's really going to start with them, right? So for example, we've just done a really cool integration with ScalePad, which will be unveiling in 24.6, which should be by the end of this year. It's actually out right now. So if you've ever used something like ScalePad, they do a really great job around system warranties. Our partners have been asking for HP warranties for a very long time. They do it, so what we're going to do is be able to integrate ScalePad directly in. And if you want more information on that, you can hit me up, and I can tell you how to get your hands on that today. But it will be kind of live production in 24.6. Now, that being said, when you start looking at APIs, it's not just about N-central. It's going to be about Cove, right? It's going to be about a lot of the other technologies that you use, right? So integrating all of those so that you have a really good semblance of what is happening across all of your technologies, okay? So, and if you've never heard me talk about the Enable Ecoverse, just know that this is something that is going to be realized over, I would say, probably close to a 3 to 5 year plan, right? Most of it is going to be unveiled very shortly when we talk about the very first foray into this vision is going to be around what we call the all assets view. This is kind of like our new take on what is the all device view, but a much more modern and a useful view for our partners. Okay, and that will, of course, be something that we iterate on over time and improve and etc. Now, let's talk about security. Let's talk about hardening your N-central server, because there are some nefarious folks out there in the world who very much know that you have the crown jewels of your customer sitting within your RMM, right? You have things like remote control. You have things like automation. You can script against any one of your customers, right? So to a threat actor, that is something that is, like a very amazing way to, maybe potentially cripple or even ransom one of your customers. So we have to do our job in terms of showing up and making sure that N-central is secure. Now, when you start looking at who these nefarious individuals are, it's things like, organized crime, right? Nation states, cybersecurity or cybersecurity, cyber terrorists, okay? Insiders. Sometimes your employees are the weakest link, right? And hacktivists. Now, how do we protect ourselves in this brave new world, right? And it's really about doing some due diligence around securing your RMM. Now, one thing I will tell you is that everything that I'm describing today is mostly in one single document, okay? There's a bunch of other source links inside of it, but it all starts with the security white paper from Enable. Now, this is where you want to use that QR code, okay? So if you want to grab your phone and grab that, because this is kind of the source of truth around all things security. Now, this bootcamp is about an hour long. This is the first time I'm giving it. So I'm based on the number of slides that I have and knowing how long I talk for, I know that it should be around 45 minutes to about an hour. Now, that being said, one thing I do want to do is kind of click on this really, really quickly and show you why. Now, it's all based in Enable documentation, so documentation.n-able.com, as you can see right here. And then what we're going to do is you can simply just type in security white paper. It will bring up this. This goes through things like architecture, remote control, scheduled tasks, physical security, and then security implications. There we go, I can say it. It is, 8:15 in the morning, and I've had a half a cup of coffee, so I'm just getting started here. Now, just know that everything is in this document. However, some of the verbiage in that document suggests that you need to do everything within that document, which means, and I'll get to the reasons why, because you can open ports to allow N-central to do whatever it needs to do. However, there may be better ways. And that's really why I wanted to create this, this webinar or this bootcamp, because when I worked for an MSP, I did certain things to really shore up security. Okay, now, first things first, let's talk a little bit about N-central architecture. Now, if you've been a partner for a very, very long time, this is going to be a little bit of a review, but there are sometimes newer partners. You've been around 6 months, a year, year and a half, and you've never really thought about what N-central really is or how it's all put together. So I'm going to kind of go through that really, really quickly with you. So I'm just going to grab my laser pointer, and I'm going to start right here. What you do know is that N-central is a probe and agent-based technology, okay? Agents go into things that agents can get installed to, Windows, Mac, Linux devices. And then there's the probe, which can get it installed into any Windows device, providing that it is Windows 7 or higher or 2008 or higher. So that's really at least today, that is really the requirement. Doesn't need a whole lot of RAM, doesn't need a whole lot of CPU, right? Doesn't even need a whole lot of disk either. Uses probably about 3 gigs in total in terms of the probe. Now, when you start turning on features and functionality and adding an EDR and a whole bunch of other stuff, okay, that does grow on from an agent side. However, natively, it does not take up a whole lot of space. Now, again, that probe is also responsible for being able to push agents to those Windows, Mac. Linux is still a manual install, but just know that we can automate this Mac and Windows piece. Now, that being said, the probe is there for everything else, right? It can look after things like printers, switches, firewall routers, NASes, SANs, iDRAC silos, and of course, it's going to be able to facilitate that agent deployment, that automation, right? Now, that being said, all of this then rolls up into the N-central server, where you can then turn on those features and functionality, right? EDR, patch management, code data protection, DNS filter. You can now start turning on the management that is now built into the N-central server. More importantly, you can also use N-central to deploy any of your technology stack, right? So whether you're using Cisco Umbrella or DNS Filter, whether you're using ThreatLocker or some other privileged access manager, that is where you're going to be able to push and manage everything through your N-central server. Now, of course, when problems occur, and that's the whole reason why we have an RMM, we're looking after customers who are going to have technology issues. That is where we're going to get into things like self-healing. We're going to then reach out, for example, and generate a ticket. And also, when you come in the morning, maybe there's some reporting you want to do, or look at analytics to see what is going on with patch management. Okay. Now, what is N-central? Okay, N-central is a hardened appliance. Now, when I say that, a hardened appliance, a lot of the hardening is done under the hood. You don't get to see, it's not physically tangible. You don't get to see all the work we do in terms of API gateways or thresholds or timeouts or underlying security around how N-central works under the hood. It is a Linux operating system. It uses, at least today, it uses a technology called CentOS, okay, or CentOS, okay. We are changing that in our very next version, in 24.5. We will be replacing that with a Linux kernel called Alma Linux, A-L-M-A, Alma Linux, okay. So we are changing that operating system as we speak, and it should be ready for sometime in October. I believe it's October 20th is our target date, but don't quote me on that. I'm pulling that out of my very early morning brain. Okay, so based on all of these things, right? N-central is considered a hardened appliance because it's not like you can get in there and manipulate the operating system or install new technologies or whatever. It's encapsulated, right? And then you take that and install it into things like Azure, right? A physical server, Hyper-V, VMware, right? So that you can run what effectively is a web server. And that is really the conversation we're having today. N-central is a web server. How do we do best practice web server securing? And that is why hopefully you are here. Okay, now let me get rid of this pointer here. There we go. And let's move on. Now, probe recommendations. Something that you will not hear anyone at N-able tell you is that there is a better way to manage probe credentials. Okay, typically, or at least historically, what you would do once upon a time is you would, start with a probe. You would, install it into a server or something as like an always-on device, usually a server. You can even set up a laptop that just never reboots or what have you. But just know that when you install it, it's going to ask you for 3 different ways of giving it or providing it access. One is through credentials, right? You can do a local admin if you wanted to, which a lot of our partners do, or domain admin, all right? Because if you're going to, for example, do third-party push, right, you need elevated credentials to be able to do that on a Windows-based device. So just know that there is a document out there around actually having a modern method around service accounts. It's called Group Managed Service Accounts, or GMSA, all right? Now, I'm not going to go through this because I could probably spend 25 minutes just on showing you how to do this. Just know that there is let me go back here. Where'd you go here? I've got a lot of PowerPoints here. No, of course I choose the wrong one. There we are. Take this QR code, please, because this is how you should be securing your probe. Effectively, what it's going to do is manage the probe and effectively modify and keep that password secure, right? You can give it the necessary privileges, for example, domain admin, okay, that you actually want. However, it will then start rotating passwords and using hash credentials that you never really get to manage or see, all right? And a lot of our partners today are using this method. Now, I will tell you, I have personally never set this up myself. I very much want to, but I haven't yet. But I have talked to many of our elite and super elite partners that are doing this and using this successfully. Okay, so just keep that in mind. Now, port restrictions, and I'm going to get into ports in just a moment because there is a particular document that we have, the security white paper, that says this is what you should do to allow N-central to do whatever it needs to do. Okay, fine. One thing I will tell you is that Enable will tell you, let me go back here, that N-central needs port 22, and technically it does. For example, if you want to use RDP from N-central, right? What it will do is try to broker a connection over HTTPS. However, if that does not work, it will then rely on SSH. You can actually lose some functionality by disabling port 22. However, if you are security conscious, for example, or if you pay attention to what happens around security, SSH open to the internet is not what I would call something that you can do in 2024. I'll say that again. SSH in 2024 is probably not a great idea. The reason being is that it is often attacked, we'll call it, okay? And a lot of partners will actually close this. Now, one thing, if you need enable support, oftentimes enable support will have to get into the back end of the N-central server, and they do that via SSH. So you may have to open this up, but just know from a day-to-day point of view, you should be closing port 22, okay? Now, everything I'm saying here is for on-premise partners, okay? Now, alternatively, you may block other ports, right? You can block everything technically except 443. However, there are some redundant measures that are in place, like for example, RDP. You know, if we can't hit HTTPS or 443, it will then fail over to another port. Same thing with the agent communication. If we can't hit 443, what we're going to do is hit 5280, which is what we call internally as BOSH. BOSH is an underlying technology that allows our agents to communicate over another port. Okay. Now I'm going to pull something up very quickly. I'm going to go back here to, let me go back to this right here. I'll pull that up and we're going to go into architecture, because right here in this document, we have port access requirements. And it does say access must be permitted to the following ports. Now, we say this because ideally, this is what you should be allowing or disallowing, all right, in terms of allowing N-central to do its thing, right? For example, if you want to use FTP, and I'll talk about FTP in just a little bit in terms of using enable backup or N-central backup, is that it will use port 20. However, you're not going to expose port 20 to the internet, right? That is purely LAN-based communication, right? What you don't see here is what we have in terms of a recommendation. It should be like a recommendation tab where it says WAN or LAN. If you are using the FTP backup method, and I'll again talk about that in a little bit, is that you want that to only stay on the LAN. You're not going to hurl N-central backups over the internet, for example. It should be on the same LAN, okay? Port 22, again, it wants to allow you inbound, okay? And then also outbound to the agent. What I will tell you is I would probably turn all of this off, except LAN-based, right? You can use, if you ever need to have support, do an RDP session with you or a remote control session with you. They could simply run commands from your workstation, right? So again, I do go through on one of my blogs. So again, go to Google and type in Hardening Your N-central Server, and there's 2 blogs there. Again, I'm doing this particular webinar because 1, I could have written a 3rd blog, but 2, I was just like, let's just do a webinar on all of this, okay? Again, port 80, right? You can see that it says inbound, outbound, and outbound on the managed device. Well, what I can tell you is I would not allow port 80 across anything. 123, used by the NTP date service, okay? Well, the good news is that from an N-central server point of view, that might be okay. However, I would still turn that off. These are what I would call nice to haves, not must be, right? It doesn't break anything. Now, 135, used by agents and probes for the WMI query. Again, that is LAN-based. When you put a probe in the environment, that probe needs to be able to talk to all the other devices in there. So you would never open 135 to the internet, right, on your N-central server. Anyways, I could go through the rest of this. Just know that you want to go through this one by one and really understand exactly what these are doing and whether or not you should allow it. Now, this one right here, okay, port 10,000. Please review your N-central server, or at least your firewall requirements around what you've allowed for N-central, because the enable admin console is now built into the N-central UI. In fact, if you go to the FQDN of your N-central server, I'll do that right now. So if I go to something like nerds training, and I'm going to put port 10,000, what should happen is nothing, okay? If for some reason you see enable web page, or what is called the legacy enable admin console, you want to secure you want to secure that port. You want to turn it down, okay? So I'll just close that. It's just going to time out. There we go. All right. So port 10,000, turn it off. Okay. You no longer need that. And then there's a few others. And again, I've always gone ahead and simply just blocked any of these. Okay. Now, there are URLs that you are going to need and allow and able to talk to. For example, sis.n-able.com, or what is known as the server in the sky. This is a repository of data for things like patch management. This is where we house all of our third-party products, for example. Or if you're not using Microsoft to pull down patches to the probe, we call it offline patching. I don't know why we call it that, but that's what we call it, is that all comes from SIS, okay? Now, there's more, right? You need to really go through. Now, if I also include, if I go back to the top here, if we go to, where is it here? Right here. There is a network requirements page. This is where you really get into other products as well, you know, N-central, you know, Cove, Take Control, etc. This is where you can make a decision about what you're going to allow and disallow, all right? Remote desktop. Okay. So again, the target machine is 443. TCP outbound recommended for best remote control experience. Well, again, in 2024, I would say security trumps, you know, experience. Okay. Let's move on here because we've got 30 minutes. All right. I've done this. Probe. We've talked about SSH. Please turn that off along with port 10,000. I should have put port 22 and 10,000. The reason why I put a poke on 22 and 10,000 the most is that if you've been a partner for 2 years, 5 years, sometimes 10 years or more, a lot of these ports are still open and you haven't actually gone ahead and turned them down. So I would again log a ticket internally about making these changes. Okay. Port and a URL allow list. Again, when it comes to those URLs, some of them must be turned on. In fact, majority of them all have to be turned on. If you start turning off like analytics, for example, it's not analytics is not going to come up, right? You're going to break it. So you have to make a decision on what to turn on and turn off. And again, if you want to reach out to me, I can give you some advice there. It depends on what you're using from the N-central side. If you're using everything in an N-central, then yes, you need them all, okay? Now, local accounts. We're going to talk about a little story I'm going to tell you. Let me just have a sip of coffee. Is during COVID, when I wasn't at Enable, I was working for a very large MSP, one of the largest in North America, top 19, I think we were, is that I went through a data breach. Now, at that time, I wasn't managing the N-central server. I actually handed that responsibility over to our Vancouver office in Canada. And one of the managers decided to change his session timeout from what was supposed to be, I believe I had it set for 25 minutes in those days. However, back in the day, end users had the ability to change that to effectively infinite, where you could actually set it to 999 hours. You can't do that anymore. 24 is the max, 24 hours. However, the browser timeout was set for 20, what I set for 20 minutes was changed. So during COVID, and this is the very beginning stages, we're talking like March 2020, I believe is when it happened, is that he left his computer open. He was working late, no fault of his own, but his home computer was attacked and it was breached. And he had his N-central server open in one of his browsers. And that threat actor who broke into his system then delivered a payload of ransomware to all of our customers on that particular, because we had 4 N-central servers at the time, on one of the N-central servers. Now, luckily, when you do automation across all of your customers, it doesn't all hit instantly. So about half of our customers were infected with ransomware, and that was all because of this, right? Session timeout. So when you go to administration defaults, user defaults, you can reset it back. And I do recommend that you keep an eye on this. I would say at least quarterly, and go ahead and always set it back to what you think is the best kind of browser timeout for your end users or for your technicians. Okay. Again, I do 20 minutes. Some people will complain. Nobody wants to log in and use MFA, 5 times, 10 times a day, but it is what it is. All right. And then you also want to propagate that change to all of the users below. All right. Use 2-step verification. This is how you enforce it. Now, again, if you're using API accounts, this will then put, because you're going to propagate it, for example. If you use 2-step verification, you will then turn it on the API accounts. So you will have to go back into some of your API accounts and then turn it off again. All right. I just want to kind of let you know that this is how you can enforce things en masse, instead of just going into the user management and kind of one by one, kind of enforcing it and changing it. Okay. So this is a really important one to me. What I will tell you is we did lose some customers over this, right? And it could have been much, much worse. We actually got very lucky at that time, only because we were a 24/7 operation. So we actually had some manufacturing customers call in and kind of freak out and say, hey, and based on that time, it was like, I think it was like 4 o'clock in the morning for me, or 5 o'clock in the morning, but it was about midnight for them, or maybe it was 1 o'clock in the morning for them. But long story short, when that happened, we were able to mitigate things fairly quickly. We turned off the N-central server. We shut it right down, kill switch, done. We pulled it off the internet. We were down. We were down for 3 days until we had kind of Enable support, and they were doing some forensics for us offline and everything else, and trying to understand what happened. And then we kind of realized what actually did happen. So again, this is a very, very important one for me. Browser timeouts. I know it sounds silly. You think like, oh, well, I like it when things don't kind of time out over a 24-hour period. Okay, but again, you're reliant on people working from home. You don't know what their laptop security is like on their home workstation. And I can tell you, my laptop travels with me everywhere I go. It's my work laptop. I can't access a single enable resource without this work laptop. I can't go onto my home computer and pull up anything. Okay. And not everyone runs like that. Certainly MSPs, right? I'm sure there is at least one of you on the phone today that can access your company resources, not only through VPN, right? But from your home computer. So just know this one is very important. Okay, I think I belabored the point. The next one is using SSO. We now have actual SSO in Enable. If you've ever logged into Enable Me, exact same experience, right? You're going to be able to do the exact same Enable Me login directly with N-central. Now, today it's called MSP SSO. I begged them to change the name, and they're going to. It is going to be called Enable Login, okay? You can use this today. It works today, okay? Just know that what we do is we take that local account, right? So say it's jmurphy at shapeable.com. We take them through a user provisioning. Go ahead, we're going to send them an email to their email address. It's going to ask them, please set up your SSO account at Enable. Okay, and then what you can do is once they are provisioned, then you're going to be able to migrate them over. Okay, 1 by 1, 10 by 10, whatever you want to do, one foul swoop, right? So you're able to do that seamlessly. Okay, now what is coming, it's actually here today for N-central, is Entra ID. So it's called federated SSO. So not only using our SSO at Enable, but also using Entra ID, right? Which a lot of our partners want, right? So that is where you're going to be able to use both of these to get a much richer experience, especially around SSO, because I would say 90% of our partners are very, very entrenched with Microsoft, right? So please check that out, okay? Now, I will tell you, it works for N-central. It works for, I believe it now works for Cove. This was supposed to be released last month, but there were some hiccups on some of our other products. I think Passportal is the last one. All of our cloud products, including N-central, will all now be able to use Entra ID. However, all of our products today do use Enable Login. So please think about transitioning your customers from local accounts embedded in the N-central system to the Enable Login. Okay. Okay, so we got about 20 minutes left, and I think I'm right on track here. All right, review your accounts, review your roles, and review your access groups. And the reason being, I'm just going to pull up my N-central really quickly here, is that when I go into let's close all of this, administration, user management, and users. Now, I will tell you, I have, what is it here, 57 accounts. You may have more, you may have less. However, I can tell you just through doing webinars and boot camps, and I probably have 6 or 7 different accounts in here. Please review them and make sure that only people who should have access to N-central do have access to N-central, especially at what we call the SO level. This is the MSP level, right? So you can see customer, site, etc., right? Now you can now see at least that there are customer level accounts as well. You might have a co-managed customer. So you might see a bunch of those. Those you would have to work with your co-managed customer and say, hey, I just want to firm up to make sure that everybody here, from your company is still, a hired resource, right? So double check this. This is another reason why Enable Login and Entra ID will become so important, because if they, for example, leave your company and you disable their Entra ID account, you don't get access to N-central, all right? So this is why. But if you do, like if you haven't done, let's go back here. If you haven't done this, like enable login and or Entra ID, then what you want to do is at least get into a review process. I used to do this quarterly. I would set up a calendar invite on my Outlook, and I would review this every single quarter because I knew at an MSP, especially a very large MSP, we had over 300 employees. So I would say every quarter we'd lose anywhere from 2 to 20, right? People would leave, it's just how the business works. Denver asks, for Entra ID, how do you enforce MFA every time? We have noticed it doesn't enforce every time. Okay. You're talking about the former Azure AD, okay? Okay, let's go back, and I need to actually explain this one a little bit better. When at the very beginning, I went through, here, let me go back to my slides. I think it's, where is it? This one. I went through this slide, okay? Right? Now, the modernization that we were going through in the Ecoverse, we are now putting out what is called the all assets view. You have to have, must have, enable login for this. So if you want to realize any of these new functionality and features, you must have at least on enable login. Okay. So what I will tell you is that, Denver, the legacy Azure AD support that we do have is going to go away. Okay. It's not going to go right away, but what you need to do is now set up enable login plus Entra ID. And what I can tell you is that there are no issues with that, okay, in terms of it not enforcing MFA or what have you, okay? Hopefully that answers your question. So everything starts with enable login, and then you add in the federated SSO from Microsoft. Let me just go back here, click through. Get out of there. Of course, I clicked the URL. There we go. Okay, so a couple things. Ensure that any users are still with your company. Ensure that any users are disabled. Now, I personally do not delete accounts. The reason being is for auditing. Disable any people who have left. Ensure all accounts that have MFA, let me say that again. Ensure all accounts have multi-factor authentication, except your API accounts, which obviously cannot. Limit API accounts to only those that are needed and remove any test API accounts. I create API accounts like crazy because I'll go through webinars and demos and hop on calls with partners or what have you. So I create a ton of these. You might actually do the same for testing or what have you. So do a review and disable any ones you do not need. Again, move to enable login, please. All right. And then also you can add in Entra ID. And again, that is available in N-central right now, okay? Okay, let's talk about backup. I think we all know, I don't need to get too preachy around this, is that when a disaster happens, you need a backup, right? Now, there is only one approved method. I will call it Jason Murphy approved. Only because you can take snapshots and 99% of the time they will work. However, N-central is a database. Okay, it's a web server with a database, okay? So what happens is that there is a lot of movement in that database. And what happens is if it doesn't back up correctly using the enable tried and true method, and you use a snapshot method, you can use what are called cold snapshots. Effectively, you have to turn off N-central, do a snapshot, and then turn it back on. That is approved. You can do that. However, N-central is always kind of moving. If you do a live or what we call a hot snapshot, there's a potential that it won't restore. So just know that this is the only kind of technical term, the only true method. Again, people tell me I've never had a problem with backing up N-central through a snapshot, live, hot, okay? Well, okay, but what happens if all of your backups are corrupted, right? So please just use this method, or at least use this method as a backup up to your backup. Okay. Okay. Carlos, is there a plan to migrate from FTP to SFTP? You will. I will say we had a plan this year to change something around backup. I don't believe that FTP or SFTP are probably very good methods for backup. I will say that we have a backup technology, right? So I would just leave it at that. I don't know what's going to happen with that in terms of roadmap, but I am hoping that we can add in something like Cove. So, and Denver just touched on that. I just saw your thing come in. So most, I would say, okay, so 80% of our N-central partners are also Cove partners. I think it's 78% or something like that, but it's a lot. It's the majority of N-central partners are also Cove partners. Would it not make sense for Cove to be able to back up N-central and carry all those backups? I think that'd be wonderful. So again, I'm not the PM for N-central anymore. Just know that that is not lost on us. We can definitely, hopefully get to that at some point. And we've got 12 minutes. All right, cool. Now, the most important thing you can do in terms, if you don't do any of what I told you to do today, this is the one you should do. Okay. It is about moving the N-central UI. So when you go to nerdstraining.n-able.com or your FQDN of your N-central server, so MSP or rmm.msp.com, when that pulls up your N-central server, it uses by default, TLS or SSL, right? It is using 443. Now, that being said, you don't have to. You can use a different port. And the reason why is that if you authenticate through a different port, you may have to go through, for example, a VPN if you're working from home, or you have to be in the corporate office to be able to access N-central. There are layers of defense that you can add in to access N-central over a different port other than 443. The reason being is that those nefarious individuals that I was talking about before, they're all going to try to get in over 443 because it is exposed to the internet and now becomes a public web server. You change the port, it then becomes a private web server. Hopefully that makes sense, right? Now, most partners of ours use 8443, and the only way to hit 8443 is to then authenticate through your firewall, through a VPN technology of some sort. If you're working from home, if you're in the office every day, well then everything should just work, right? Corporate network, or small office network, we'll call it. That being said, I would highly recommend using this. Now, I'm just going to pull this up really quickly, and it kind of walks you through what you should do in the UI. In the UI, it's a really simple setting. It is simply, let me get rid of this. Where are you here? When you start changing port from 443 to 8443 and click save, that's it. That's all happens. So it's really all firewall work, right? But again, highly, highly recommend that you do this one. Let me go back here and change that there. So highly recommend this one. Pull the N-central UI right off of the internet. That way people aren't trying to credential stuff or try to use dark web for the older usernames and passwords. Great question, Denver. Okay, so Denver's question is, okay, but what about agents? Agents are still communicating over 443 and behind the scenes. Okay, so it's the UI access that we're talking about. What typically happens in terms of data breaches of RMM, not just enable, we're talking about Kaseya, ConnectWise, whoever, is that they actually get into the UI of the RMM, right? Now, can you potentially break in using man-in-the-middle attacks of the agents and some other sophisticated stuff off a single agent? Potentially. However, that is much, much, much more difficult, okay? Denver, if I got your email address and I did some sophisticated dark web searching, I could probably find at least 5 to 10 of your passwords. Now, I could also try that on your local account in N-central. and simply just get in. That is how easy it is. Now, I'm sure you're not. I'm sure you change your N-central credentials every 2 or 3 months or what have you. So probably not you. I'm picking on you, but it's one of those things where this does happen. And the easiest method is simply because, listen, people are busy, right? They're not going to spend time doing really sophisticated, enable-centric man-in-the-middle attacks off our agent. So a lot of that is still always going to traverse 443, right? So behind the scenes, that agent and central communication. It's the UI that we really, really want to focus on, pull that off the internet. Okay. Now it still runs publicly, right? But the access is now gone from the internet, if that makes sense. Okay, so an important one. Now, Denver, we have talked about changing the agent communication to something else. However, we're talking a tremendous amount of work, like let's say a year's worth of work just on changing agent communication. I can't say we won't ever do it, but today it's not something that we're going to be doing because of all the competing priorities around modernization and what have you. But the agent is changing. Just know this. That legacy agent that you click next on and install into your customers' computers that register back to N-central, that agent is going to go away at some point into a new modern agent. I just don't think that agent is going to use a different port either. Okay. Okay, I was going to say last but not least, but just know that most of you are using some method of security in N-central that is not what I would call the gold standard. Even my N-central, because I run 2012 R2 or I run older operating systems. Just know that, for example, your Sentinel-1 in November will cease working on anything that is not TLS 1.2 compliant, which is 2016 server or higher, or Windows 10 or higher. I forget which 1720, I forget which build, but just know that you should be using this. If you have Windows 7 machines, if you have, we still have partners running 2003 server. Long story short is that you at some point have to pull those out of your N-central and use modern security with the right protection, with the right cipher suites, the right encryption, so that the rest of your customers are protected. You may have 5 devices that are running 2008 vanilla, not 2008 R2, but I'll just say the older 2008. So if that's the case, pull them out of your N-central and then flip this into a modern security. You have to have a conversation with your customer. I even had a customer that was running Windows XP up until 2 years ago, because when they built and developed their application software, they all did it in Windows XP. And apparently they don't have the budget to redo their software and make sure that it's compliant within Windows 10 or Windows 11. So it is just one of those things where some customers will resist because there are some financial ramifications to this, but just know you would also potentially put some of your other customers at risk. Denver says 443 is fine. If not, there are lots of larger clients that will filter outbound. Exactly. Cool. So again, modern security profile, TLS 1.3, TLS 1.2 only. If you have someone running Vista, Windows 7, right? Not going to work in modern. This is where you have to get into migrations. Okay. So the modern security profile configures N-central UI so that it does not support 1.0 or 1.1. Okay. So SHA-1 and all weak cipher and non-PFS ciphers. So I'm not in the cipher game myself, but if you know what this is, hopefully it makes sense. This does support TLS 1.3 on all UI, API, and agent ports. Disables weak SSH ciphers, MAC, and KEX algorithms. Will work with modern operating systems, Windows 10. Again, I believe it's 1720 and above. and 2016 server and higher. This meets PCI requirements for TLS ciphers and support for only 2048-bit keys. Now, last but not least, because we have 3 minutes. Now, a lot of our partners are using Cloudflare. I'm sure even of the 21 of you who are on here, at least one of you may have Cloudflare in front of your N-central server, or what is known as a web access firewall, a WAF, okay? We have a lot of partners who have spent a lot of time testing and even documenting it. However, technically, this is unsupported by Enable, at least today, okay? The reason being is that if we were to do Cloudflare, it would actually block 2 ports that Cloudflare cannot accommodate for based on the protocols of what is called, don't escape me now. It's called GPRC, lowercase g and then RPC. It's a particular protocol that that we use that Cloudflare can't accommodate for. However, that makes it officially unsupported at Enable. However, most of our partners aren't using the ecosystem agent for things like either Intune or DNS filter or what have you. If you're not, you can go ahead and actually use this, okay? So highly recommend that you check out Cloudflare, right? And set up tests. If you don't have an NFR system, and an NFR is a not for resale system, it's like a test device, you could effectively test in an NFR, put behind Cloudflare, do all your testing, and then put it into production, okay? Now, short and sweet, if there are any questions, Denver, you have another question. Can we proxy to get around the issue? Which issue? I guess I'm not understanding that one. TLS. I would say probably not. I don't believe you can proxy as well with our agent. You're introducing a form of complexity that, while technically we do support, makes agent communication much more difficult. All right. So I would say you could test, but I just don't think it'd be something viable today. If there are any questions, I'm going to keep this bootcamp open. Just know that I hope you enjoyed today's bootcamp. I did try to keep it as short as possible. I could ramble on about security forever, but give me a rating here. I try to click launch, but give me a rating here. 5 being high, or 1 being not valuable at all. Hopefully you got something from this. If you need to reach out to me because you have questions 2 weeks, a month down the road, feel free to send me an email. It's the letter J, MURPHY at n-able.com. You can find me on Reddit. You can find me on, I have partners that hit me up on Slack or on LinkedIn all of the time as well. So you can add me to LinkedIn. Just look for, go into a LinkedIn search and just type in N-central_nerd, and it should bring me up. Okay, I'm gonna close that up. And if there are any questions, great, ask them now. Otherwise, thank you for joining, and I will see you on the next bootcamp.